Hello, this is Jason. Welcome to one of the first podcasts for the Justice for All Party of North Carolina. This was actually recorded on 7/22, and I apologize for the terrible editing. If you're interested in helping us, join the campaign or just subscribe to YouTube and let us know in the comments that you can do better podcasts and videos than our expertise allows. But with there is some great information discussed here. It will be co-moderated by Stacy and Christina, party members, as well as distinguished guests and very knowledgeable Drew and Leroy. We will delve into the systems of commerce of both the current reality of the United States and globally, as well as what that means locally, statewide, and nationally. And we'll actually go into the distinction between American descendants of slaves and American immigrants from other countries and the meaning behind what the Republican National Convention discussed, their choice of vice presidency, and a couple other issues that are pretty serious. But hopefully, we'll keep it lighthearted and keep it moving. Again, apologize for the terrible editing. If you're watching the video, my audio was lost, so every comment I have is overdubbed. I hope I don't misrepresent anything I said or any questions I asked and the participants' responses. But without further ado, let's jump into it.
Yeah, totally. Dude, Jason, thank you for having me. I'm excited about this being one of the early podcasts that we're doing as a group. I think it's a really great topic because, right now we are in a crisis point in late stage capitalism. That's what a lot of the hullabaloo is, just across the world. And because of that, there's some seriously weird things happening, especially at the RNC at the most recent convention that they hosted in Minneapolis. I guess they're still hosting it right now as we speak. Um, but or Milwaukee, right? It's in Milwaukee. That's where it is, not Minneapolis. The other M1. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, you alluded to some strange happenings, and there are certainly some strange happenings. The Republican Party seems to be having a really pro-labor message at the moment, which is bizarre. Um, I heard in some speeches, JD Vance referred to the working class. Um, they were talking about union and non-union workers, which is bizarre. Um, yeah, it's an interesting shift that I see in the Republican Party right now. Yeah, I don't like what they're selling. I think JD Vance is an odd choice. I mean, just a couple years ago, he was talking about Donald Trump as potentially America's Hitler. Um, and so it seems like strange that he went from that. And really, if you've ever read Hillbilly Elegy, there are love letters to the working class, and then there are just letters filled with hate. And that's what Hillbilly Elegy really felt like for a lot of people who read it, especially a lot of people from Appalachia who read it. They were like, wow, that's really an unfair depiction of us. And filled just rife with, bootstraps mentality and stuff. So it's interesting to hear him uh, speak empathetically and genuinely, well about the working class of rural America. And, he's a Yale educated lawyer. It's kind of bizarre to hear from him. And it's bizarre to hear from the entire, like even Sean O'Brien, the Teamsters president, he showed up to the RNC, which is just crazy. I can't believe it. Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Sean O'Brien, the president of the Teamsters Union, got up there and he said, to quote him, he said, "American workers own this nation. We are not renters, we are not tenants, but the corporate elite treat us like squatters, and that is a crime." I mean, Sean O'Brien's not wrong. He's not wrong at all. That is how the American elite sees American workers. What's bizarre is that though he didn't formally endorse any candidate, it it is interesting to see his presence at the Republican National Convention, considering the Republican Party's own anti-labor sentiment and policy over the last 50 years or so, right? It's really interesting because, especially since the rise of Reagan, the Republican Party hasn't been remotely pro-worker. As a matter of fact, Reagan saw an opportunity to kind of break through the Democrats' grasp on the working class in America by tying social conservative values, which were popular in certain sects of the working class, to anti-worker policy and legislation. And so that's what Reaganism marked was, okay, we're going to win over these voters with these cultural hot topic issues that don't really serve any, economic purpose or economic agenda. But we're going to tie our economic agenda to those issues. That's where you get the bootstraps. That's where you get the self-reliance and stuff. And so all the while he was doing that across the United States, he was stripping away the power of the working class by, tamping down on unions. Famously, he fired all the air traffic control officers who went on strike for a decade or for weeks, and he fired all of them just unilaterally through executive power, and that's pretty anti-union. It's pretty anti-worker. So all while he's preaching this kind of like pro-worker dignity stuff, the results are serious. Decades later, we see the failure of neoliberal capitalism. We have wealth inequality, poverty, homelessness exacerbated to the point where there's like serious civil unrest. And that's the legacy of the modern Republican Party, growing out of that kind of austerity politics of the Reagan era. And usually it's a legacy that the Republicans don't shy away from. They're generally pretty proud on, small government, big business for, to help workers with the economy, that type of thing. But this is a pretty serious pivot for the Republican Party into some, at least rhetorically, pro-labor sentiment, which is fascinating. It's interesting to see. Odd pivot, I'll say. What's happening here is that at this moment in America, the working class is emboldened. It feels powerful enough to make certain demands of their politicians, right? The working class for decades now has been saying, rent's too high. I can't afford groceries. I don't get paid enough. My boss has 4 super yachts, right? And that's why it's such a particularly effective message from the Republican Party, this kind of odd pro-worker sentiment. But the truth of it is that the Republican Party is just not at its core that party. And everything they're saying, too, is, it's actually quite similar in a lot of respects, the policy of the Republican Party, despite what it's saying here, to the Democratic Party. When we talk about protecting capitalist interests against worker interests, that's something the Democratic Party has been doing these days, right? So the Democratic Party hasn't been very friendly to workers. Biden ended that railroad workers strike. NAFTA from the Democrats, near unanimous support in the early 90s, is a lot of what the Republican Party is pointing to in this kind of xenophobic version of pro-labor sentiment. The 2008 financial crisis, Barack Obama bailed out the banks that destroyed the American economy. He's a Democrat. He's the poster child for the Democratic Party. He is the great success story. And so what the Republicans are doing is really smart, because they're tapping in to a dissatisfied electorate. But the way they're doing it is erroneously. They're spewing lies and hate speech. And on top of that, it's they don't actually have the interests of workers in America at their heart. Not whatsoever. It's all smokescreen.
So why and how would they expect this party that like from Reagan era was not about the working class in any way and just choosing this vice president to work for people to accept them and what's their plan?
Mm. Yep. Well, I'll tell you how. I mean, JD Vance had this crazy speech where uh he essentially talked about the affordability of housing crisis that we have today. He The flow of his argument was that the 2008 financial crisis hits, right? At the same time, Barack Obama is president, and he's opened the border to migrants from the global south. That's the argument JD Vance advances. Beyond that, he says, and because of the influx of all these migrants from the global south, although he doesn't call them that, he calls them something atrocious like illegal aliens or something to that nature, to that extent. But because of that, the uh, what little houses were being built are finally being taken by this new influx invasion, I think is the word that JD Vance used, influx of immigrants from the global south through America's southern border. And the reality of the of of this here is that that's not remotely what happened. 2008 hit, the financial crisis, and as Americans' homes were being foreclosed on, the all these big holding companies grew, and so BlackRock being one of them. And what they do is they go in, they buy all these foreclosed homes, and now, boom, housing is financialized even further. So home ownership isn't the model anymore in America. It's corporate ownership over the land. It's a new tier of almost feudalism. Rentier capitalism is what Mao called it, the French term rentier. And rentier capitalism uh, being that major stakeholders and investors own the housing market. They've cornered it. They control the pricing now. That's what's led to increased housing prices. That's what's pricing people out of the market. That and interest rates. Um, and interest rates are designed to protect the global rich. But at any rate, my point being that there is a story to tell that is populist and anti-Wall Street, anti-capitalist, pro-worker about 2008, and it has nothing to do with the racist dog whistles of the Republican Party against the global South migrants. Um, so, yes, is there a problem with the Democratic leadership and the norm in this, stage of capitalism in America? Yeah, there's an issue. The Democrats are offering, the same, a lot of the same. Nothing changed. They are not reformists. They're reformists within the system. The Republicans now have pivoted from an anti-working class sentiment to something that's filling a void of political need. There is a void of, white rural working class people in America. Their story has been ignored. They've been ignored by politics as is. And so it makes sense that it's selling. Makes sense that 50% plus of the country can get behind an agenda like this. But it's just not true and it's not legit.
Almost positive I didn't quote this exact thing from Sharice Burdenstelli during the interview with the panelists, but I did mention something from Black Square, Red Square, and I think this is probably more appropriate. She begins in chapter 7 with quoting Henry Winston in 1974. Today, with the increasing ascendancy of the world socialist system, imperialism merges with anti-communism and racism even more closely in its efforts to stave off extinction. She goes on. Such governance serves to manage and criminalize racial and political others whose ideas and beliefs as much as actions threaten to transform the racialized class order. this type of governance works with white supremacy to encourage cross-class collaboration that obfuscates economic exploitation and discourages interracial class solidarity. What can the Justice for All party do to counter these initiatives, which we've seen from the duopoly, both parties? How do we dismantle these parties, which both partake in this type of ideology where they exploit white supremacy and even any type of division, really, to avoid class solidarity within our ranks in order to overtake the class which shouldn't have power but exploits everyone to maintain theirs? That is the ruling
I think
class.
that's a great question. So as as the mediation, right, as the kind of the negotiator between business and the working class, um, the political sphere operates as like an arena where it's allegedly an even playing field for everyone, right? But big money wins out all the time, especially in this era of Citizens United. So the Democratic and Republican parties are really working for the same team. That's why Peter Thiel, who is an avowed liberal, billionaire, CEO of Palantir, it's a weapons manufacturing and consulting firm. They do, military contracting work. He owns PayPal. Why this billionaire who's an avowed liberal, and for a while was in the press as being like the progressive CEO guy. He is the one who funded the majority of JD Vance's initial Senate campaign. So what's the commonality here? And it's that there is a billionaire class and millionaire class who profit off of the way that things operate today. And because of that, they will do everything in their power to continue operating the way that it is today. And they do that through manipulating the voters who are the working class. And that's what the Republicans are doing. They're selling a story that sells well to the Republican, rural white working class. It also sells well to, you know, uh, white folk who are college educated now. They're voting for Trump. So the working class black people in America are swinging toward Trump. Latinos are swinging toward Trump. What's happening is that the Republican Party is offering an alternative to the reality on the ground, which is highly associated with the Democratic Party. And the reality on the ground of liberal policy in America is a continued undermining of workers' rights. It's a continued, it's the continued exploitation, expropriation of the international working class. It's continued warfare throughout the world. It doesn't really matter who you're fighting for on the duopoly, Democrat or Republican. The baseline of their policy is all the same. And so for that reason, it's really disheartening to see the Democratic Party get outflanked on labor. They won't move on labor. They just won't. And the Republicans are offering this rhetorical move that outflanks the Democrats on labor so that no longer can the Democrats seriously say in the press to the electorate, we're the labor party. We're the workers' party. And that's desperately what the Democrats want to do. They just aren't. So here we are. We're
I got a
stuck
question.
between more of the same. Yeah, what you got, Stacey?
So, listening to you and realizing that the Republicans have kind of co-opted, the Democrats weren't doing much for the working class. The Democrats, who were traditionally the party for the working class in the past, weren't doing much.
Mm-hmm.
The Republicans kind of swept up that really the population of voters who feel really disenfranchised. It's a large voting block. And I'm also
Mm-hmm.
wondering So nobody in the mainstream was speaking for the working class. So the Republicans kind of took hold of that voting block and said, okay, we can speak to them. It doesn't have to be the truth, but we can speak to them and get them to hear. But I'm also wondering how or what percentage of the reasoning behind that could have been threats from third parties, being that there's so many other third parties now that are not all, a lot of us are actually speaking for the working class, and you know, how much of it is us having an effect on them? Yeah, that's the question.
I really love that question, Stacey, because I would absolutely say they're being reactionary, and they are reacting to a public that no longer accepts, their shenanigans. This is the ultimate fear of capitalists. What happened in France just recently? I don't know if you saw the news coming out of France, but all of the leftist parties, and France, the way that France works is that there are a couple big parties that kind of rule, but there are a bunch of smaller parties that exist and always have seats in parliament. Like, they are notoriously, they win because French elections are much more fair than American elections. So the actual third parties have a chance at winning. Anyway, 3 or 4 leftist parties in France recently united behind a ticket of their own. They coordinated their candidates in the last month of the election, pulled people out in certain districts, put people in so that they could confront the fascist far right Marine Le Pen's party. It worked. They won the election. They're able to form their own government now of leftist thought. It's like the Socialist Party, the Green Party, the Communist Party, etc., right? Like 4 different leftist parties came together. This is what they're afraid of, right? Because there can exist multiple leftist pro-worker parties in a nation that can threaten the hegemony of pro-capitalist parties. That's what the Democratic and Republican Party are, right? They're pro-capitalist, pro-imperial parties. In the United States, they've managed to get their corrupt, sticky fingers over everything. And because of that, it's impossible for a third party to actually contend with them. Their greatest fear would be allowing these third parties to run on certain pro-worker, actual pro-worker policy and sentiment. And that's their fear. And so what we have to do in order to fight against the duopoly is to move toward a model where this kind of independent leftist policy is at least allowed, access to the ballot. And here we are, the Democratic Party refusing us access to the ballot. But that's my thought on that. That's their fear. Their greatest fear is that.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah,
this
totally.
is Leroy.
Yeah, I was watching the RNC the other night, and I watched the union guy come on and spoke. It was clearly he was speaking to 2 parties, and that's the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And he expressed to both parties his concern. And he was able to do that because what I was observing was the fact that the Republican Party is no longer the Republican Party is mega. Okay. With the Republican Party, they have had primaries in which the people had a chance to have candidates point out their point of view, and they chose, of course, Donald Trump. The Democratic Party instead didn't run a primary, and they suggested to the people, number one, that we're going to tell you who's going to be the candidate. You don't get to vote for that candidate. With that in mind, if you think about what Trump has said and in his first term, he told you what he was going to do, and he did those things. Now he says he's going to have the greatest deportation in the history of America. What that means is we had people that came here across the border for a better life, and that is work. With deportation, those workers would then have to be replaced. Okay, with that replacement, then American workers, American citizens, would then be able to have a job. Now, and we also saw that several billionaires, Elon Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, came around and did what? Endorse Donald Trump, because they don't have to deal with him. And when they deal with him with deporting the tried to place in place, and here what I believe a fair, livable wage for folks, they're going to have to change. And so, just recognizing that, I just want to bring that to the attention and see what someone else think about the strategy that the mega group has done, and they have actually taken over the Republican Party.
I think that's a great point, is that this is a new Republican Party that we're witnessing. JD Vance, he's the vice presidential candidate now on Trump's ticket, but only 3 years ago, he was saying that Trump could be America's Hitler. He was speaking out against Trump's populism as So yes, the Republican Party has completely shifted into this cult of personality based on Trump's policy, and Trump's policy centers the grievances of the white working class, and the grievances of the white working class that he's chosen to kind of seize on are racist, and and it's anti-migrant labor, anti-immigration, it's xenophobic, it's hateful, it's scapegoating, and it's not the alternative that American workers deserve, because at the end of the day, this movement, this pro-worker movement, is global. It's talking about the divisions of the people who own the means of production, the capitalists, and the laborers, the people who toil under their demand. And that's what the ultimate division is. And so anything to, prop up American workers over other workers internationally is achieving the same thing as racist dog whistles about like United States domestic labor issues, or things from like the Reaganite era with like crime bills and stuff like that. It's all in a similar vein, and it's meant to distract and manipulate and separate the working class as a group, a truly politically viable group across the globe. But it sells well. It sells well because it's identifying a certain amount of neglect that the white working class has felt from democratic policies, that all working class people have felt from democratic policies. That's the other part that we miss out on. It's not just the white working class that's been hurt by democratic, like liberal policies. It's been the black working class, the Hispanic working class, the working class of America, period, has been hurt by the same old milquetoast neoliberal policy that the Democratic Party kind of has honed in on. No amount of identity politics can save you from that. The Democratic Party has not been pro-worker. And so the Republican Party is identifying a very legitimate grievance. They are just misappropriating it, and they're pinning it on a group of workers in their own right, workers in the United States from the global South, migrant workers, right? So that's my thought on that anyway. But does anybody else have any thought? I would love to hear anybody else's opinion.
One of the things that I like to touch on is in America, we have to look at racism that takes place. But when we start looking at other countries, we have to understand they operate more on class structure more than race structure. With that in mind, American descendants of slavery, which we follow, Christina and I, we understand that we are pivoted to the bottom, though in the Democratic Party, we were the party. In other words, when it came to voting, because black women were voting at 98%, 88%, and black men 88%. Everyone else was going from one party to the other, depending on what they were receiving. Okay, policy. We instead was looking at the Democratic Party because each election cycle, they was suggesting to us what we were going to receive for the vote, But then after the votes were passed, as Joe Biden did, he invited Al Sharpton and Black Lives Matter into the office, and they asked him, says, what are we going to receive for the fact that we have placed you in office? And his comment from rumored, I wasn't in the room, that whatever blacks, American descendants of slavery received, they will receive from the Latino. Divisiveness, right? At the same time, it was a slap in our face. That's one of the reasons that Justice for All party was so instrumental in the fact that we were advocating for reparation, and Dr. Cornel West and was advocating a commitment to justice in the form of reparation, and he had a time frame attached to it. Now, when we get to the Republican Party, we have to understand what Donald Trump during his 4 years in office, and that's why a lot of especially black men, are moving to the Republican Party, because if you was to ask them on the street, what's the difference? What was the difference between Donald Trump as president and Joe Biden as president when it comes to the money in your pocket? And they tell you, they would say to you, well, I had money in my pocket during Trump presidency. So with that in mind, that's why they're leaning more to Donald Trump, and the reparation, though a lot of American descendants of slavery feel like we will never receive it, but it is a justice claim and it should be received. So, there's just several avenues that's taking place, several things that are taking place. And you hit on so many of them as you were speaking earlier. And I just wanted to touch on those items as well. But, again, where we at? Class. Yeah.
Actually went in hard here. And I didn't say this in the real podcast, but this whole podcast, I was thinking Drew be like the Marxist, Engels, Maoist version of Mac Lethal. I'm making pancakes, but I'm speaking politics. Anyway, the point I actually made was like the black people feel disenfranchised, but both the Republicans and the Democrats in respect to, are the Democrats taking advantage of black people with respect to they are the black people, quote unquote, party in name only, and are the Republicans taking advantage of that? And has either party lived up to the promises they have made to black people? And this to Leroy, have black people given up on the political process in general?
Oh, no doubt. When you look at the history, then blacks wasn't with the Republican Party in the beginning. So no doubt that over 40 years, they got to study with HR 40 reparation before writing a check. Dr. Martin Luther King, in his last 2 weeks before being assassinated, understood what had happened in America. He spoke only about socialism had taken place during that time, in which the American government had given, had built colleges, had formed extension agents to teach whites how to farm when the black slaves had been the one who was doing the farming. The government had given low interest loans. There was so much that had already been given, yet the 40 acres and the mule had never been received. So Dr. King said, when I come to get my check. And as we know, what happened to him, an assassination took place. So, yeah, a lot of American descendants of slavery have given up on the idea because so many things have happened. Taking 1983, I believe, when we got off civil rights, 83, 85, what came right after that? The immigration bill. What happened? What happened then? Immigration began in an influx new group of people. But when you look at the data and look at the number of immigrants that was here before that period of time, which American descendants of slavery had dealt with Jim Crow, redlining, all the injustices that had taken place. And as soon as we get civil rights, the next thing the government does is allow another group of people to come into the country. So with that, it pivoted us again to the very bottom. And if you look at the data today, American descendants of slavery has lost not only farmland, they have lost their home wealth, which is our value is in the home, homes. That a lot of that was lost during Barack Obama's term in office. He was designated as the black president. Yet still, we lost ground as a group of people. So, yeah, a lot of us have given up on the idea of reparation, though it makes us very, I guess, it upsets us a great deal when we hear of a president such as Barack Obama tell the country it would be unfair for everyone else to pay for reparation and injustice, when we, as American descendants of slavery, never volunteered to come to America to build this country on our back. And those who volunteer should understand if they come to the greatest country in the world, then whatever that has to be paid for being here, they should contribute. Yet that was said. And you asked the question, have a lot of us given up? Yes, a great deal of us have given up on that justice claim. Again, because if we look at the number of immigrants that have just crossed the border, right? Not speaking of the ones who come into the country legally, we're still at the bottom after 402 years here in America. We're still at the bottom. So people just
That's facts. That's beyond debatable. Check out the 2023 California reparations study in the links. That's
yeah,
beyond.
absolutely.
Well, but I will say that I don't think that the programs that immigrants have are necessarily all that great, right? ICE detention is not particularly terrific, and migrant workers who do come here are exploited all the time. I think if we want to talk about where we are at the moment, it's that there is a story of labor exploitation and expropriation for every member of the working class, no matter their history, right? ADOS should be looked at as, the corporate capitalist class profiting off of enslaved workers, because that's what it was. It was financed by London banks. It was, a corporation for the colonies. It was a capitalist enterprise, the trade and use of enslaved labor. And so we can trace those lines of where that money went and how it went down, because it's all legitimated in like records of global commerce, because it's all legitimate commerce at the time, right? And so because of that, we can track the ways that dirty money is being used today that is actually coming from enslaved labor. And so it can become a thing where, a labor commission looking at exploited labor rights, at ADOS reparations, things like that, take the money back from the people who stole it initially, who profited off of it and continue to profit off of it, take that money back, not from the American taxpayer, right? That's, in my ideal, that's how reparations would go down. And it wouldn't necessarily mean pitting ADOS, so American descendants of slaves today, against a newly migrating class, because at the end of the day, they were exploited. Their labor has been exploited. The peasants across the global South have been exploited in a similar way to slavery. Not obviously not as dire, not as violent and everything like that, right? But at the end of the day, to give profit to somebody above them, they're workers too. And so we can utilize their strength as a vocal movement, not as a voting electorate block, but as a vocal movement of workers in America to stand in solidarity with Black workers, with American descendants of slaves, with the white working class, with Appalachia, et cetera, right? And yeah, that's exactly right. Because at the end of the day, it's us versus the capitalist class.
But here's the
One, please. Mm-hmm.
here's the issue though. If we could get America to understand there's one issue, and that is, in Germany, a Holocaust took place. And in that Holocaust, thousands was killed. They were killed and they died, unfortunately. Horrible. Yet we have an understanding that after death, there are the living. And the living are the descendants of the ones who died. Mm-hmm. And America has no problem writing a check every year to the Holocaust victims. Yet, in America, they don't see the slave descendants as victims. Now, when we look at other groups that come to America, we also have to look at the data. When you Google a worker in Guatemala who makes $1,641 per year, a year, and then he or she can come to America and make $16,401 a year, that's a step up. And at the same time, the government does not say you cannot send that money back home and build in your country. And we as American descendants of slavery see, even in Chicago, is definitely one of the places we see it happen. When the immigrants come, they're not advocating for us. They're here for a better life. And they come into the Black community. And when we speak of jobs, and that's one of the issues that was spoke about, I think, during the debate, jobs. When you look at the data on the jobs, American descendants of slavery, jobs are the bottom jobs in America, paying jobs. If you look at what we make per year, the data says the majority of us make between $12,000 and $36,000 a year. There's a very small amount of American descendants of slavery that makes over $200,000 a year here in this country. So if we could get, and this is why I think justice for all is so important. Justice has to begin somewhere in America. And justice has to begin where justice should have been dealt with by the federal government in the beginning, and that is with slavery. And American citizens are going to have to recognize this and come and side with us as allies. And at the same time, immigrants that comes to this country are going to have to recognize whether it be the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, cannot understand that is the first step in this movement is to do right by slaves and their descendants. So,
Yeah,
I
Leroy, I'm
understand.
with you.
Yeah.
I hear you for sure. I think that, people talk about the founding fathers of America and stuff like that, and it's all these white dudes, and it's like, nah, man, the people who built this country were slaves, right? And it was under the whip that they built this country. It wasn't voluntary. It wasn't engaged in good business practices. It was violent coercion of labor. This is the same idea that has been exported by capitalist interests since its inception, right? When we talk about the start of capitalism out of the feudal era, it was a violent occupation, monopolization of common resources, so land, resources, etc., right? And it was violent, necessarily so. A lot of peasants had to be killed. So in that same vein, the violent forced coercive behavior to force enslaved labor, it's baked into what capitalism was, tied to an imperial colonial project at the time. That is the same foundation that informs politics today, both globally and domestically. And what we forget is that it is a working class, an international working class, right, that is being coerced through violent means. The reason that a lot of these migrants are coming from the global south is because the United States wreaked havoc on their nation during the Cold War. The United States CIA operatives, there are things domestically that we need to do actively, and they can serve a model for things that have to happen across the world, right? I'm not saying that as a state party, right, we're going to have the kind of sway to influence the way that things are happening in India, but we can look at the way that American militaristic budgets are affecting, like the things that we are doing internationally that are messed up, that are violent, that are intended to continue to reify and recreate the status quo of how things operate on a global scale in capitalism through militaristic export and markets and the exploitation of labor, right? We can look at what America is doing. We're inside the belly of the beast of empire, right? So we can look at what we're doing actively and say, nope, we're going to divert the funds from that to the things that we need to take care of domestically, which are things like reparations and actual investment in communities rather than in policing of communities, and workers' rights and taxation that's fair, that doesn't tax workers, rather taxes the people who are profiting off of workers, right? That's the kind of shift in focus that we need, right? People think that just because we're calling out, this thing is happening over there, we care about it, we want to send money. That's the model of philanthropy. What I think we're suggesting is a different model. We're saying we refuse to engage in the practices that create that condition actively for those people, right? And that's actually changing systemics, right? That's changing institutions. And that's changing material reality rather than just saying, hey, we're against that. There are things that we can do. And so, I think those would be the priorities moving forward for this party on foreign policy. And but you guys are right. There are things domestically that we have to take care of. And those have to be priorities. Yeah, they have to be priorities first. We're not going to be able to influence the world. It starts local. It builds up to states, it builds up to regions, it builds up further to a national issue. Then it becomes an international issue, right? There's a scale here. And right now we're focusing on local and state. And hopefully we can build up to calling for the change that we want to see in those realms that are more out of our control.
I'll probably have a lot more questions.
Word. Well, I think I can sum it up in, hey, this Republican National Committee convention was weird. A lot of weird pro-labor sentiment. I don't buy it because we know the history of the Republican Party. I don't buy it because we know the intentions of the ruling class and the duopoly. I don't buy it, neither should American workers, right? That's the TLDR. If you weren't able to follow the logic here, the TLDR is that the Republican Party is trying to manipulate a certain class of working people, and it's with the intention of continuing to obfuscate and divide the American working class. And we deserve better. We can do better. The Democrats aren't better. The Republicans aren't better either. But that's why we're here. We're working to make something better.
Well, that's it. By the time you hear this, hopefully we're on all of the podcast platforms and you can subscribe and check out weekly or bi-weekly podcasts from the Justice for All Party of North Carolina, where we discuss ongoing newsletter information, what's going on within the campaign here in North Carolina, and we will feature the candidates statewide as well as any other pertinent information that's relevant to you. We thank you for your time, and yeah, justice for all. Let's make a difference. We're a moment and a movement.